18 by 123 statute miles above the Earth. You heard the report from Mission Control in Houston of 102 and 106 miles. Well, those were nautical miles. It's 118 by 123 statute miles. The speed is almost perfect, just a little under the 17,500 miles an hour that was desired, but well within the range for Earth orbit. And now this revolution and a half, during which the astronauts and ground control will determine if all of the spacecraft machinery is functioning properly, and they should be committed to man's first journey to the moon. The next important function then will be the determination of that commitment. If it is committed, the translunar injection, so-called, the beginning of the flight to the moon itself, will come at 10:41 Eastern Standard Time. I think I said 9:41 a little earlier. It's not. It's 10:41. That's 2 hours and 50 minutes after this blast-off. The flight to the moon will take 2.5 days, as you undoubtedly know by now. We've mentioned it several times. This is a $315 million effort getting this Apollo 8 up, and so far it looks like it's worth it. Everything has gone perfectly. There are some 2.5 to 3 million parts in that Saturn V, and you can't have even a 1% error, because you can see how many parts so that would mean would be malfunctioning. There's got to be virtually no error to get off successfully, and this flight certainly went well. With all of the ground control people and equipment, there were no problems. The spacemen now, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Ed Enders, are riding there in their 210 cubic feet of the Apollo spacecraft. That's about 70 cubic feet to a man. A compact car would give you 68 cubic feet to a person, so you can see about what they have to live in for this next historic week. In the Gemini spacecraft, they just had 40 cubic feet a man, and in the Mercury, just 55. This spacecraft is, however, a transcontinental bus compared to a compact car when you compare the various sizes of spacecraft that have been up so far. They've got hot and cold running water there in the spacecraft. They've got a vacuum cleaner to keep the dust down and the debris out of the spacecraft. The center couch, the one that Lovell occupies, can be folded up so that they have standing room to perform navigational sightings and get a little exercise. Hammocks are slung under their seats so that they can sleep away from the chores that are going on at the consoles themselves. This is a so-called open-end mission that they're flying. That means that there are many commit points along the flight plan. One of the commit points has already taken place. Two of them have, as a matter of fact. First, the launch, and second, the orbital insertion around the Earth. The next commit point is the one of which we have spoken, translunar injection. That is, firing off the third stage engine again with its 230,000 pounds of thrust to boost out of Earth orbit to come almost close to the escape velocity from the Earth's gravitational pull. Not quite. They don't want to do that. If they escape the Earth's gravitational pull entirely, then they would have to depend upon their engines to get home, and if they fail, they could not. This way, they can go out to the moon and be captured by the moon's gravity. In a sort of a slingshot maneuver, the moon's gravity would pull them halfway around the moon, but would not be strong enough to hold them in orbit. So they'd fly off again, such as the orbital mechanics, and come back being caught by the Earth's gravity again to a safe landing if they did nothing more after that translunar injection. They plan to do more, of course. They plan to fire off their service propulsion engine on the far side of the moon when they'll be out of touch of the Earth communications network on the back side of the moon. They'll make that decision, put themselves into lunar orbit. That's a retrograde maneuver, so-called. They slow down so that they do not fly off from the lunar orbit again, but stay in lunar orbit, balancing carefully between the moon's gravity and their own centrifugal force. Then they circularize that orbit, and then that engine does have to fire one more time, and that's the important one. After they have made their 10 orbits of the moon, that engine fires behind the far side of the moon again. And if that firing is successful, the spacecraft is sent on its way back toward Earth. If the engine does not work on that particular firing, however, the astronauts and their Apollo 8 spacecraft could be caught in lunar orbit forever. And since their life support system aboard the spacecraft could only last 5 or 6 more days, that would mean a tragic termination of this flight. And of course, nobody is anticipating that. But it is one of the hazards that has to be constantly kept in mind. Also, they are flying for the first time. Man is making his first trip through the deep radiation of space out to beyond the so-called Van Allen belt, which is a belt at the outer fringes of our atmosphere that captures the radiation from the solar system and holds it in a rather thick belt. It is not believed that they are in any danger from this radiation nor from solar flares because of the heavy spacecraft covering behind which they are shielded. If, however, they were getting out of the spacecraft, such as making a landing on the moon, then the solar flare activity, these periods of intense radioactivity from the sun could be dangerous to them. However, we have a big tracking network of astronomers around the world keeping tabs on the solar flare activity. It's called the Solar Flare Network, as a matter of fact, and they say that no solar flare activity is expected during the course of this flight. Now let's take a look at the launch, which took place just almost 25 minutes ago here at the Merritt Island Kennedy Space Center.
We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have cleared the tower.
Tower clear. 13 seconds.
First the voice of Jack King there, now Paul Haney.
We get allowed to clear Frank Borman. 32 seconds.
Right at this point, we were taking
I want to see the first stage looks good.
We were taking a terrific buffeting here in our Space Center, CBS News Space Center.
Have progress at 50 seconds into the flight. Out, Mike Collins tells the crew we're looking good. One minute, 15 seconds, and we're a little more than half mile into the sky and about nearly 4 miles downrange.
Seems almost inconceivable. 6.5 million pounds, the weight of that vehicle. $130 million horsepower
1 minute, 4
takes to get it off the ground.
All looks great. Mile and 6/10 into the mission, and Frank Borman has confirmed each event as it's been passed to him by Mike Collins at this point. The crew has been given a go for staging. Inboard out on time, Frank Borman says. The inboard engines. 2 minutes, 25 seconds. We see an S1C, the first stage cut off. S2 has ignited, we can confirm. And the thrust looks good. All engines, all sources show the second stage is burning perfectly. 2 minutes, 51 seconds into the mission. And at 3 minutes into the flight, the range safety console has been released at the key. 3 minutes into the flight, we're 50 miles high.
And the flight of Apollo 8 was well on its way. That great Saturn V is incidentally 112 times as powerful as the Redstone, which lifted Alan Shepard, later Gus Grissom, into their 15-minute suborbital flights back in 1961 and began the U.S. manned space program. We have confirmed from Houston now the official orbital figures, and they are almost precisely what had been asked of this mission: 99 by 103 nautical miles, or 114 by 118 statute miles. The mission, of course, has not yet been committed to the moon, as we have pointed out here a couple of times this morning. There are several possibilities. If it does not seem to be going well and they do not want to fire off the S-4B third stage for the translunar injection, they can go into a 10-day low Earth orbit, which is a possibility, an alternate mission. They could go into a high ellipse orbit all the way out to 4,600 miles from Earth and back on a large sort of an oblong orbit. They could, if they elected and want to fire off the third stage, but not go into moon orbit, they could go on that so-called free return trajectory out to the moon and letting the whiplash effect of the moon's gravity send them back to a safe landing here on Earth. Or they could go into an even higher orbit around the Earth called a semi-synchronous orbit, going out 25,000 miles out. Any of these are alternate missions which they have full flight plans ready for, if indeed that's what they choose to do. In Downey, California, at the North American plant where Apollo is built, we have a full-scale mock-up of the Apollo spacecraft. Correspondent Bill Stout, who was with test astronaut Leo Krupp. Gentlemen, Paul Haney said a moment ago, the anxious business of checking out the spacecraft is underway. And I wonder, Bill, if maybe you could show us what this checkout consists of.
Right, Walter. Leo, what are they doing right now? We've gotten through these first critical points that Walter has described to us, but at this moment, what is Borman doing, Lovell and Andrews?
Well, at this moment, Bill, all three astronauts have removed their helmet and gloves, so they're in the same configuration that I'm in here with the pressure suit, but without the helmet and gloves. Each crew member has a checklist that he's going over to make sure that all the spacecraft systems are operating properly. Borman is taking care of this side of the panel, setting up his switches, checking out his systems. Jim Lovell is probably down in the lower equipment bay right now, unstowing some of the camera gear, getting it set up. And another important task he'll be performing is on the guidance and navigation system. He will make sure that the optics covers are jettisoned. He'll have to insert the eyepieces and slew the sextant in shaft until he reaches a certain point. This hits a spring which ejects the covers. If the covers would not eject, he would not be able to take star sightings.
I see. And there are covers on the outside of the spacecraft that keep these eyepieces from being damaged, I suppose, in launch.
Yes, they're put on to prevent any contamination from getting on the lenses during tower jettison and staging and so forth. And they will be jettisoned at this time, though, and Jim will make sure that they are jettisoned before they go into translunar injection.
You say it's a simple spring-loading device,
That's right, and it's triggered when he slews the sextant and shaft. After he reaches a certain point, this trips the spring and the covers are ejected.
It seems so simple, and yet this early in the flight, if these spring-loaded devices fail to work, if in effect they were blinded within the spacecraft, would that be a serious enough problem, do you think, for them to change the nature of the mission?
Well, this would be a NASA decision. They would have to evaluate if the other systems are functioning, if they would be willing to go without the optics. But this would preclude optical sighting from the spacecraft if the covers did not come off. They could use a backup method of sighting through the window using the COAS, or the collimated optical alignment sight. So there is a backup means of navigating using the crewman's sight through this window rather than using the sextant and telescope.
So even the small matters, Walter, can be very important at this critical point in the flight. Back to you.
This is Walter Cronkite back at our CBS News Space Center. The one thing we have not mentioned in the flight of Apollo 8, I don't think, this morning, is the fact that we are expecting to get television pictures from Apollo 8. It's equipped with that 4.5-pound RCA camera, and the astronauts expect, according to their flight plan, to make their first transmission from the spacecraft tomorrow afternoon around 3 o'clock. They'll make another on the way out to the moon. Then they'll make 2 transmissions from the moon itself, that is, while they're orbiting the moon. Another on Christmas Day on their way back from the moon, and a 6th transmission is expected on Thursday. Terry Drinkwater is at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Terry, what are they doing out there right now?
Yes, Walter, they're watching just as everyone else is in the country, watching and are very happy here. They're thinking back to all that has gone on here in unmanned exploration of the moon. And that, Walter, began with this little vehicle nearly 10 years ago. This is the Pioneer. Pioneer 4 came within 37,000 miles of the lunar surface. And for the United States, that was the start. And after Pioneer came this spacecraft. This is Ranger. It sent back the first close-up pictures of the moon's surface, pictures which revealed details never seen before through telescopes. Men on Earth could see for the first time tiny craters on the moon as small as 10 inches across. Surveyor, the next craft, was equipped for soft landing, settling gently on the lunar surface, photographing and probing with its shovel. One purpose of Surveyor was to scout prospective Apollo landing sites. Surveyor demonstrated the feasibility of landing men on the moon. Next, the Lunar Orbiter series. Flight control for Lunar Orbiter was here at JPL, but this vehicle was the project of NASA's Langley Research Center. Orbiter went around and around the moon, photomapping almost all of the lunar surface, including the far dark side. In all, the Rangers, Surveyor, and Lunar Orbiters have shown that it's possible and safe for men to go around the moon and later to land on it. More than 100,000 close-up pictures of the lunar surface have been taken by all of these vehicles, and now, if all continues to go well, those 3 astronauts will get the first personal close-up view of the moon. Walter?
As a matter of fact, Terry, I think that 45 objects have now been launched at the moon since man's first attempt to get out there at all with anything. That was the first United States attempt, which was a failure, on August 17th, 1958. 27 of these 45 attempts have been American, 18 of them have been Soviet. 16 have failed to reach the moon, or they have bypassed it. 7 of them have done that, to go into solar orbit. That includes, among the failures, the first 7 American attempts, the U.S. Pioneer program, which literally barely got off the ground, or didn't get off the ground. Then 10 of the 45 attempts have impacted the moon. 4 Soviets and the rest American. 4 have been successful in relaying information back before they impacted the moon, that is, before they crashed into the moon. Some accidentally crashed, attempting a soft landing, and reported nothing. Others, like the U.S. Ranger series, sent back most successful photos in their last few minutes before hitting the moon's surface, and some 1,700 pictures altogether from the Ranger series. The Russians got the first impact on the moon, incidentally, with their Luna 2 in September 1959. 7 of the 45 objects have soft landed on the moon, 2 of them Russians, 5 of them U.S. surveyors, and it is perfectly possible that these men in the Apollo 8 could conceivably see from 70 miles high one of those surveyors, or pick up at least a glimmer of light from one. 9 others have orbited the moon, and 3 have gone around the moon and returned to Earth. 1 to a hard landing on Earth. There wasn't any attempt to recover it. 2, the recent zone flights of the Russians. Borman, Lovell, and Anders are now in orbit. Some 9,000 hours until they make their try for the moon, it says here. That doesn't have anything to do with fact. We'll take that back. We'll be reporting briefly every half hour at any rate on their progress this morning as they orbit the Earth and prepare for translunar injection, for beginning their flight, actually on the way to the moon. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS News Space Center.
Yes, Jed, with me is Leo Krupp, who is Chief Apollo Research Pilot here at North American. This is an outside view of the spacecraft we're sitting in. Leo, it's almost exactly an hour since liftoff. What have they been doing, and what are they doing now?
Well, as soon as they were inserted into orbit, the first thing the crew did was remove their helmet and gloves and stow them there. So they're in the same configuration I'm in right now. As soon as that was done, the next order of business was to check out all the spacecraft systems. Now, each pilot in the command module has a checklist. Frank Borman is checking out this area of the cockpit and all the systems that are on this area. Jim Lovell is checking out the center console and all of his associated systems. And Bill Anders is checking out the right side of the cockpit where you're setting and his systems. As soon as Jim Lovell gets through checking out his systems on panel 2, he'll go down into the lower equipment bay and check out the guidance and navigation system and make sure that the optics covers that were on for launch to keep the lenses from becoming contaminated eject properly. He'll do that by inserting the eyepieces, then sighting through the eyepiece while he slews the optics. When he slews the optics to a certain point, he hits a lever which ejects a spring, and the spring ejects these two covers, opening up his optics.
Just pops them off on the outside of the spacecraft. Huh?
That's right. In addition, while he's down there, he'll be unstowing a lot of gear. The camera gear he'll be getting out at this time, and they'll be putting it in place so they can start their photography.
But mostly, up until the time they make the decision whether to go for the moon, mostly they simply have checkouts. Then there's nothing really critical that has to be done at this point in the flight.
Well, the critical part is to make sure all the systems are go, because they have the 2 parking orbits to be sure that the spacecraft is ready for the translunar injection. So they will do a thorough checkout of all the systems. If there are any malfunctions, they want to know it before they commit themselves to translunar injection.
And as they are right now in the spacecraft, as you are, in the suit, but with the helmet and gloves off, is that correct?
That's right, and this is a very comfortable configuration.
This is the newer suit done by ILC Industries.
That's correct.
What's different about this compared with the old one?
Well, the mobility in this suit is much better. You can move your arms around when you're pressurized. You have better knee joints. It's just a much more comfortable suit to wear. You can do things in this suit that you couldn't do in the old suit.
Why are they so quick to take off the helmet, though? Is that an uncomfortable device?
Well, they've been in the helmet and gloves since pre-launch, pre-breathing 100% oxygen, and so you know how it is when you're inside of a fishbowl, you want to scratch your nose or something, so they're very anxious to get the helmet and gloves off.
It's almost the first thing they do then when they settle down into this part of the, what would you call it, the cruising mode.
That's true, and as soon as they are in translunar injection, as soon as they're on their coast to the moon, they will remove this flight suit, this pressure garment, and it'll be all stowed underneath the center couch. And from that point on, the crew members will be just in a pair of lightweight coveralls.
All the way?
All the way to the moon, around the moon, and all the way back in.
Just before re-entry, I assume they put on the other stuff.
No. Wally Schirra on Apollo 7 came in without the helmet and gloves, and the level of confidence is now that we really don't need the pressure suit for landing. So on this flight, the present plan is for the crew to come back in just in shirt sleeve environment, in a lightweight pair of coveralls.
Like these that I'm wearing. What do you think, Leo, is the probability factor, if that's the way to put it, that the 4B, the engine still attached to the spacecraft, will properly reignite and give them that boot off toward the moon?
Well, I don't know what the probability factors are, but I'm sure they're a string of 9s. We have a very high probability that everything will work properly.
It's that good, and they think that they can rely on it?
That's right, Bill. These things have been tested, and unless something unforeseen comes up, the probability is 99.9999.
Now, the flight plan says that they will make this move for the moon, or the decision and then the move, at the end of either the 2nd or 3rd orbit of the Earth. Now, why is there this flexibility? Is that room for error, room for correcting problems that may arise? What?
Well, of course, the optimum is to do the translunar injection at the end of the 2nd parking orbit. However, if something does come up, if the crews can't get ready in time, or if a problem arises that takes a little time to correct, they do have the flexibility of making another parking orbit before committing the translunar injection.
So that if they need more time to think about it or to correct something, or if the ground needs more time to set up the instrumentation, they do have that much flexibility.
That's right. We're all hoping it'll go at the end of the 2nd parking
The end
orbit.
of the 2nd, which would be, what, another, not quite 2 hours.
Yes.
Leo, once they're up there, assuming everything goes as planned and as desired by the people in the space program, once they get up there and begin circling the moon, they then depend on the service propulsion system that Walter was talking about a little while ago. They depend on that entirely to get them back, don't they?
That's right. It's the only engine that has sufficient thrust to get them out of the lunar orbit to sufficient velocity to return to Earth.
And from looking over all the material that you people have in connection with this flight, it seems to me that that's the one place where there's no alternative. Almost everything else in the flight book, almost every designed maneuver can be made up for by using some other piece of equipment or making some other move. But once they're up there around the moon, either that thing works or they never come back.
That's true, but the service propulsion system is a very simple mechanism. It uses hypergolic fuel, so there's no ignition source required. All you have is a valve to bring the two fuels together into the nozzle for the combustion. There's very few moving parts. It has extremely high reliability. It's completely redundant. All the plumbing, the valving, the gimbals are all redundant. The test work on this engine and the flight tests have been just fantastic on the reliability.
But even with all those backup components, the thing must work. That engine must go off on schedule and bring them back.
That's true.
Does it give you a prickly feeling along the back of the neck, Leo, when you think about the possibility that three men you know very well could, if something went wrong, end up circling the moon with no chance of coming back?
Well, of course, we'd all feel pretty bad if this should happen, but I'm convinced that this will not be the case, that the flight will be a success.
Well, certainly
and the experience these fellows are being subjected to and the data they're going to bring back is certainly commensurate with the risks they're taking.
Well, it's certainly off to a very good start. If that launch is any measure of what's to come, it's going to be a most exciting day, and as you said, Jed, a most exciting week.
Gentlemen, thank you. CBS News color coverage of the flight of Apollo 8 continues after a station break.
The roads leading from Cocoa Beach and the town of Cocoa and Titusville, I think it is, leading from there to the area of the Space Center here, Cape Kennedy, Florida. Coming in this morning as we did, about 4 a.m., all along the roads, wherever the view was, wherever there was any view available at all, there were people who had spent the night there in campers. They're out on the beaches, on the river banks, along the roadsides, wherever the rocket on its pad was in sight. They had set up card tables, having picnics, playing guitars, sleeping in sleeping bags, and in many cases they were parked in places where it was illegal, but the police were being very tolerant because it is a very special day down here, and they have allowed people to park wherever they wanted to that would not interfere, did not interfere with traffic. And for miles they were lined on the sides of the road, parked and waiting to watch this magnificent sight. At about 11:30 last night, I'm told, I was asleep. At about 11:30 last night, the entire public area of Cocoa Beach, that is the streets and the restaurants and so on, were deserted because everybody went to bed early, knowing you had to get up early. And the room clerk at the hotel said most people had asked to be called at 3 a.m. And he had so many calls to make at 3 a.m. that he couldn't get them all in, so he had to start at 3:15, so as to get them all done somewhere close to 3 o'clock. Everyone understands that it is, in an abused word, in this case applicable, I think, a truly historic event. The first man going to the moon, compared often to Columbus's voyage. But in fact, it seems to me that this one is much more daring than Columbus's was, because he set out from Palos in 1492 in a sailing ship. And at that time, sailing ships had been in use in the known oceans of the world for more than 1,000 years. And so Columbus traveled in a familiar, conventional, and commonplace, in fact, means of transportation, whereas Bowman, Lovell, and Anders this morning were traveling in a means of transportation far from conventional. It didn't exist a few years ago. Many bugs left in it, many questions left about it. It has proved to be reliable, but not totally reliable. And so, as I say, it seems to me that their voyage today, particularly if they decide to go to the moon, will turn out to be a great deal more daring than Columbus's was. There is a difference. We know where we are going. Whether or not we get there, we know where we want to go. We know the moon is there, whereas Columbus was looking for one place and found another. In fact, he was only looking for a new place to get to India. In any case, it is one of the truly great adventures and people from as far away as could make it here last night and this morning have driven, flown, walked, and ridden bicycles and motorcycles and parked all over this part of Florida, wherever they could get a glimpse of the rocket leaving the Earth, so they could tell their children and grandchildren that they saw the first men go to the moon. Peter Hackis.
Yes, David. One of the most important items aboard Apollo 8, and we've been hearing this in the past, obviously is the guidance and navigation system. It's the whole system together is what gets us to the moon on this very complicated feat and back again. We have here a schematic, a model, which will tell us, I hope, how this thing operates, and here to explain it all to us is a gentleman who works for the company that developed it, AC Electronics. His name is Don Detman. Mr. Detman, how does the guidance and navigation system work?
Well, basic to its use, of course, is the typical gyroscope. In this case, we have 3 of them in 3 different orthogonal directions to measure up and down, left, right, and forward and backward, of course.
When you talk about a gyroscope, you mean like one of those little things that we used to have with a string, and you pull the string and it stands on?
So. A little bit more exotic, of course. The whole idea then being that we establish the platform, the stable member platform, or inertial measurement unit, as the whole component is called. Now, we want to establish then the platform and make sure it never shifts position or changes its location. So consequently, the 3 gyros will tell us, and we'll control that particular happening. In other words, when the cabin as such and the astronauts are actually experiencing a shift or a change, a rotation, the platform as such will always remain exactly where it was. Consequently then, a set of accelerometers, again measuring those same axes, will determine then how much change of speed they had or how much change of attitude. We're extremely concerned, of course, with our position, our velocity, and we tie this all in with time to know where we're going, where we are, and what we have to do.
In other words, no matter where you go in space, once you have set the gyros inside this mechanism going, and they are preset on Earth, you go anywhere in the universe.
That's right.
This particular machine will be in exactly the same relative position.
That's right.
So that this is your reference.
Yes. Now, what we want to do, of course, is from time to time, again, check and make sure our reference is still doing the job properly. And this is where we come to using the telescope. And the astronaut, as such, in peering through either one of these 2 devices, the one on the right being the telescope, which gives a wide angle and just a general picture where he wants to aim or look for a star, and the other being a much finer instrument, will now telescope it down and precisely provide a gun sight type aim for him. At that point in time, he can push a button on the control panel and at this time then inject an input to the computer telling it precisely when that star was in a certain position. At the same time, of course, all the optics is giving that information again and interfacing it with the platform information to know exactly where that star was.
Now, where is the stable platform itself located within the spacecraft?
The stable platform is directly behind this panel.
Duplicate control or a duplicate monitor, is the information from this guidance system also reflected on the ground so that if some of the controls are off, they can check
The ground is acting as the prime guidance system in this case. But in this instance, the inertial platform on the vehicle and the whole guidance system can be operated entirely independently. And with that, and the astronaut, they could go on wherever they chose.
I thank you very much, sir. This is obviously the key thing. One final thing. On the way in, coming back in, the re-entry, does this take over?
That's right. At that point in time, the intent will be to cut down the amount of G's that the astronauts are going to see. And as we've said, our attitude will be controlled at all times. And on descent, we'll be proceeding in this direction, of course, with the heat shield in front. And we'll maintain that position, but adjust it slightly, only so that the drag as such then doesn't create too big an impact on, say, the astronauts as well as all the equipment on board.
So the amount of G's, the amount of pull is constant
will be
on the
minimized,
way in.
right.
Fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Detman.
Thank you.
We are now 1 hour, 21 minutes, and 31 seconds into this mission. The spacecraft is now approaching the west coast of the United States and is about to enter another period of daylight. You can see there dawn is steadily marching across the United States, and it's sunrise now somewhere along the Rocky Mountain Cordillera. The spacecraft is leaving the general area of Hawaii and is now approaching the west coast of the United States. Now, after it has made it's completed its first revolution and goes over the Cape again, then 3/4 of the way through the next revolution, they could get the command to take off for the moon. We are standing by, of course, to see whether or not that decision is going to be made, whether it's going to be affirmative or negative. And as I say, it may come about 3/4 of the way through this next revolution. By the way, let's go back to our tracking map there and let me explain just a little bit about it. You can see where the spacecraft is now located just to the east of Hawaii, and the one light that's blinking there indicates the ground station, which is now in contact with the crew of Apollo 8. We have other ground stations indicated on the map, but the one they are using at the moment shows a blinking light. Now at this moment, they can talk to two ground stations, one Hawaii and one, it's actually located in Mexico. Or no, that's the California station, I guess. I can't read it too well from here. Now we have a third ground station that is possibly being activated at this moment. David was mentioning a moment ago that the crew of Apollo 8 is in pretty good physical condition, and they're apparently not going to be bothered by head colds, which plagued the crew of Apollo 7. You remember Walter Schirra was complaining about it all through his trip. As a matter of fact, on Schirra's recommendation, the crew of Apollo 8, this mission is somewhat better supplied. They have aboard 60 decongestant pills, 60 antibiotic pills, 72 aspirin tablets, 12 nausea pills, 12 stimulant pills, 21 sleeping pills, and 18 painkiller pills. Medical supplies also include 3 injectors for motion sickness, 3 injectors for pain suppression, a 2-ounce bottle of first aid ointment, 2 1-ounce bottles of eye drops, 3 nasal sprays, 2 compress bandages, 12 adhesive bandages, 1 thermometer, and 2 spare crew biomedical harnesses. So Apollo 8, among other things, is a bit of a traveling, freewheeling apothecary shop. I suppose, too, that the crew of Apollo 8, these 3 members, are carrying in their pockets someplace those traditional trinkets or gadgets, which seem to be traditional. I don't quite know how that got started. Marine, maybe you know. What is this whole thing about these gadgets and trinkets or whatever that these fellows take along?
Well, I suppose that technically they're unnecessary, but they're well thought out things that they carry somewhere in their pocket or in a pouch, sometimes an American flag. Next to my photograph album, the most precious thing I have is my own charm bracelet, and I brought it along to show you because...
Was this what Scott carried?
Well, each astronaut, the first men, carried something for the 7 women. And this is Scott's, you see the Aurora 7.
Yeah.
Here is Gordon Cooper's Faith 7. I love Wally's, I love the name of his capsule, Sigma.
Yes.
I love Sigma 7. It means the summation of everything. It has a good hard sound. And I don't wear it anymore. Because it's so dear, I'm afraid I'll lose one. Here, I took this off. This is Alan Shepard's Freedom 7, and he actually had this put on later under the charm, but this was a little piece off Freedom 7.
Well, this whole thing was more or less designed then with the idea of a charm bracelet in mind, was it?
Oh, no. In the beginning, they didn't think about it. They wanted to carry something for the wives. But when Gus Grissom flew Liberty Bell and got back, he took Betty and me out to the Cape. The day he got back, the first films had come in. And you remember that he was in the water and the helicopters were pushing the waves over him and the water was going down. He carried some dimes in his pocket. And Betty was watching that film and she says, those dimes aren't helping a lot. And this is Gus's dime.
Imagine what some of those wives should be able to do with some pebbles if they should bring some home from the moon. those would be rather strong demand.
How much do you think they'd bring on an open market?
All right, we are now 1 hour and 27 minutes into the mission.
Good.
The spacecraft is now approaching the west coast of the United States, and yes, David, at the Cape.
You were saying a minute ago, you were listing all these miscellaneous materials they'd taken along with them, and you said they had one thermometer. Did you say one thermometer for 3 men?
One thermometer, yes.
Well, doesn't that mean that if one of them catches something, necessarily they will all catch it using the same thermometer?
Well, I guess it would depend upon how long a virus will survive on a thermometer. Probably, maybe not too long. And Frank McGee.
Yes, sir. 1 hour and 27 minutes into the flight and about 1 hour away from the first chance we'll have to make a decision on whether they will continue the mission to the moon. At the moment, well, within a few minutes at any rate, Lovell will begin to record on a pad he has with him some detailed information on what they should do if they start to go to the moon and then lose communications with each other for some reason. They have a plan that they would put into effect 90 minutes after they started the TLI, started toward the moon, or another plan that they would put into effect 4 hours after they started toward the moon. This just in the extremely unlikely circumstance that they should lose communications with each other after they initiate that particular maneuver. When they make that burn, they will increase their speed to about 25,000 miles an hour. Now, I can say about 25,000 miles an hour, but you will appreciate, of course, that they're not anything like that casual about it. They, in fact, want to increase their speed 9,990 feet per second. And there is an organization down at Houston, which is across the street from the Manned Spacecraft Center, called TRW, Thompson Ramo Woolrich. And they have a collection of exceedingly bright young men who do nothing but study trajectories for space missions, manned space missions. And when we were down there a couple of 3 weeks ago, they were kind enough to sit down and tolerate my questions and give me a briefing on it. And I was, first of all, enormously impressed by the fact, Chet, that of the, 5 or 6 young men in the room, I would hazard the guess that their average age was about 24 years old. And they have these computers which they have programmed to actually simulate missions to the moon. Their operating slogan is that they've been to the moon many times. They can, as a matter of fact, with their computers, programmed the way they have them, simulate as many as 500 different missions to the moon within a half hour's time. They also have them programmed so that they can take the full 6 days. And they can tell you just about anything you want to know about any trajectory or any path that you want to follow to get to the moon, how much fuel will be required, what the speed will be, how long it'll take, and all the other factors that go into it. But I was enormously impressed by the fact that if at TLI they are off speed by as much as 0.8 of a mile an hour, and this is at a speed of 25,000 miles an hour, if they're off by as much as 0.8 of a mile an hour, they would do either one of two things. They would go 120 miles above the moon instead of 60, or they would impact on it. Of course, again, they would have almost 3 days to correct for that, should they be off by that much. I understand we're in touch with the astronauts again. Is that correct, as they're passing over the United States? And we should be getting some conversation from them.
Apollo 8, Houston, go ahead with backup voice check, over.
Roger, Mike, I gave you a count. I'll give you another one. Are you standing by?
Roger, standing by.
Roger, it's Apollo 8, the backup voice. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Over.
Roger, Bill, reading you weak but clear. Go ahead with normal S-band voice check.
Roger.
Obviously, they're going through some communications checks to see if they can hear the spacecraft and the spacecraft can hear them. If they should lose communication either way, this would be one of the several conditions under which they would decide not to initiate the maneuver toward the moon.
8, Houston, over. Houston, this is Apollo 8 on normal S-band. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now you read, over. Apollo 8, Houston, reading you loud and clear, normal S-band. Help me.
Checking out one channel of communication and then switching over to another using different antennas and what have you to test it out and see that their primary as well as backup systems work.
Apollo 8, Houston, reading you loud and clear on normal S-band. How me, over.
If they go to the moon, and when they go to the moon, and get on the far side of it, we will not have voice contact with them.
Roger, Houston, this is Apollo 8, reading you loud and clear on normal... Roger, reading you loud and clear on normal S-band. How me?
Out of a 2-hour orbit around the moon, they'll be out of contact about 45 or 50 minutes.
Apollo 8, Houston, over. Houston, Apollo 8, how do you read on VHF, over? Apollo 8, Houston, reading you loud and clear. We're also reading you loud and clear on S-band normal. How me, over? Roger, I've been reading you loud and clear. I'll give you another count on S-band normal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How do you read? Roger, that's loud and clear, Bill. California, would you enable VHF downlink, please? California enabled.
That's Bill Anders and Mike Collins doing those voice checks.
They're about back over the Cape again now. And we have heard nothing either from them or from Mission Control to indicate that they're having any problems of any kind. If this is the case, they have the option, as they go over Australia this next time, of deciding whether to start for the moon.
All right, Houston. Roger, we are going to rewind your tape recorder, and we have the TLI plus 90 and TLI plus 4-hour pads at your convenience, over.
And those were the maneuvers we mentioned a while ago to be put into effect.
Roger, ready to copy.
If needed.
Roger, TLI plus 90. SBS/G and N. 63531 minus 164 plus 129er. Are you with me so far, over? Roger, we're with you. Okay. 004 17 4265 minus 04402 minus 00001 plus 48387 178 169er 359er not applicable plus 00185 48587 603 48383 06 2027 250.
What is the number?
The information that Mike Collins is passing to Jim Lovell are the procedural numbers and angles should an abort become necessary at 2 discrete periods after the translunar injection burn, 90 minutes after and at 4 hours after. And we should hear quite a few numbers.
Plus 1 1 2 3 minus 03000. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3. 3, 4, 4, 9er, 4. 0, 1, 7, 4, 7, 3, 9er. North set stars. Roll 0, 6, 8. Pitch 0, 9er, 7. Yaw 3, 5, 6. Ullage none. Other high-speed procedure not required. Over.
Houston, this is Apollo 8. We missed a portion of that maneuver pad. Can you start with HP and go down to Foresight Star? Over.
Roger. I say again, HP plus 0, 0, 1.
Well, all those numbers mean a great deal to the men, but what actually they've done is take into consideration where they actually are, what their actual orbit is, and where they would be at both 90 minutes and 4 hours after the translunar insertion. And if they should decide to come down at either of those two times, an hour and a half or 4 hours later, these are the numbers for the maneuvers they would perform at that time to get them back to Earth. A lot of numbers, they missed a few, they backed up and started repeating them for them. We, of course, are going to stay here and stay with you and hope you stay with us until we find out whether we are indeed going to the moon. We'll be back in just a moment. Now this word from Gulf.
This is Gabriella. She lives on the island of Giglio, about 12 miles off the western coast of Italy. On Giglio, it is customary that people married for 1 year be given a celebration. And like everyone else, Gabriella has been invited to the party. About 2,000 people live on Giglio. There are also several boats, 3 buses, 5 small trucks, 20 cars, 40 motor scooters, and 1 service station. The station is the only source of gasoline, marine fuel, and lubricants on the island, and is run by Gabriella's good friend. His is far from being the largest of the nearly 600 new Gulf stations in Italy. But like Gulf dealers everywhere, he is prepared to meet all his customers' needs, big or small.
We are 1 hour, 41 minutes plus into the mission of Apollo 8. The crew and of Apollo 8 have just concluded the first revolution. Just passed over Cape Kennedy and heading out now across the Atlantic to begin the second revolution. And somewhere within this next revolution, about 3/4 of the way through it, as a matter of fact, we could get the decision to go for the moon. It could be made as Apollo 8 passes over Hawaii the next time around. It is now sunrise out in the general direction of the West Coast. Many of you Americans are just arising. If that be the case, good morning to you all. Apollo 8 is indeed underway, and for your special benefit, here by tape is a replay of the launch of the Saturn V rocket, which occurred at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is the way it looked.
20 seconds, all aspects. We are still go at this time. T-minus 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. The engines are armed. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit. We have liftoff. Liftoff at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have cleared the top.
Are clear, 13 seconds. Seconds out, we get a loud and clear from Frank Borman. "32 seconds. Visitor says the S1C, the first stage, looks good. The crew confirms their progress at 50 seconds into the flight. Out, Mike Collins tells the crew we're looking good. One minute, 15 seconds, and we're a little more than half mile into the sky and about nearly 4 miles downrange. For 40 seconds. All looks great. Mile and 6/10 into the mission, and Frank Borman has confirmed each event as it's been passed to him by Mike Collins at this point. The crew has been given a go for staging. Inboard out on time, Frank Borman says. The inboard engines. 2 minutes, 25 seconds. We see an S1C, the first stage cut off. S2 has ignited, we can confirm. And the thrust looks good. All engines, all sources show the second stage is burning perfectly. 2 minutes, 51 seconds into the mission. And at 3 minutes into the flight, the range safety console has been released at the Cape. 3 minutes into the flight, we're 50 miles high and about 10 miles downrange.
That was the way the liftoff of Apollo 8 looked this morning as it arose from Cape Kennedy and shook up the east coast of Florida. TASS in Moscow reported promptly and in detail today the launching of Apollo 8. A 6-paragraph factual dispatch filed from New York appeared on the official Soviet news agency's wire within minutes after the launching at Cape Kennedy. It made no comment. Soviet radio stations did not interrupt normal programming to announce the launch. Soviet television, which sometimes hooks up with live Western television broadcasts, did not show the launching. A studio spokesman said no Soviet television coverage of the story is planned for today. Only one Soviet newspaper had mentioned the shot prior to the launch. Now, we're going to replay the launch or the takeoff of Apollo 8 once more, and this time, let's do it in slow motion and see how it looks. We're ready? Go.
This is Roy Neal at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston. And at the moment, we're standing by for Paul Haney to make an expected announcement. While we do, here's the picture of what's going on at this moment inside Mission Control. Here comes Haney now, I believe.
Paul's not ready to talk just yet. I guess he's not quite ready to make that announcement.
And so, as we look now, I'm led to understand that what we expect from Paul Haney and his public affairs console are the voices of the astronauts at the time of their translunar insertion. And here they are now on tape. Very little conversation from the astronauts during that busy time. In center picture right now, by the way, you can see Michael Collins. And with him, Walter Cunningham, another of the astronauts.
All right, coming up on 20 seconds to ignition. Mark it, and you're looking very good. Roger.
We're hearing the voices of the astronauts at the time of translunar insertion. While we watch the live picture of what's going on in mission control at this moment.
Ignition. Roger, ignition.
This whole operation at the moment is on tape. This is mission control during the moment of translunar insertion and the voices of the astronauts as recorded.
All right, booster, all systems go. Roger. Flight Fido, FG 800 miles, we go. Roger.
And climbing.
Looking good, flight. CMC, looks good, flight. Booster.
Hawaii confirms that they've got a very solid lock. And Borman almost nonchalantly says, Roger.
Houston, we're predicting cutoff 2:55:58, and it looks exactly nominal here. Roger. Apollo 8 Houston, that predicted cutoff 2:55:52, and that's exactly as it should be. 2:55:52.
This is Apollo Control. Houston, 3 hours, 22 minutes into the flight. Exactly 1 minute ago, we observed separation from the S-4B. The crew immediately turned around and had a look at the S-4B, and we're watching that pitch attitude right now, and telemetry coming to us over the eastern test range.
And that's how it was during that big moment of translunar insertion, as the men in mission control told the astronauts what was happening, and the astronauts relayed back their information back and forth. And finally, as we've just learned from Paul Haney, the third stage of the rocket has now separated, and the plan for the next half hour or so is that the Apollo 8 will fly formation with the booster, observing it as the men proceed at a very high rate of speed toward the moon. They're now higher than men have ever flown before by a great margin, and of course, moving on toward the target. One thing we've noticed here, too, this morning, is the extremely good quality of the voice communications. We had been led to believe they would be even better than we had observed during Apollo 7, but that quality is excellent. It's still a foggy day in Houston. As a matter of fact, you can almost but not quite make out the Manned Spacecraft Center just across the street. And down below at that Manned Spacecraft Center, they have a Christmas tree right out by the main gate. And atop that Christmas tree, and we're going to try to show it to you here if we can, you'll notice a little quarter moon instead of the usual top decorations for such trees. That's the symbol. Here, I think if perhaps I move over to the side, you can see the tree. There it is, right down below. Now let's see if we can pick up that quarter moon. That's the kind of symbol that they've set up covering this Christmas season and the Apollo 8 mission for all the people at the Manned Spacecraft Center. Well, that's the way it is. Christmas time at the Manned Spacecraft Center this year should be a time of some celebration if this flight keeps going as well as it has. Apollo 8 is truly on its way. The people in the Manned Spacecraft Center itself have a good deal to be proud of. As a matter of fact, here they are now. And this is the live picture of those flight controllers observing the flight, watching through their computer-driven displays to make sure that things are going well, getting ready to tell the astronauts whether or not a mid-course correction will be necessary in the next half hour or so. And that's the latest from the Manned Spacecraft Center. We'll be back in just a moment.